While some of my ancestors did come from France, making macarons is not part of my DNA. I've never been to France, and I'm quite certain that none of my ancestors were wealthy enough to have macarons in their diet. We're doing very small batches of macarons as a practice recipe, adding in 25 grams of super fine almond flour. Adding in 25 grams of powdered sugar or confectioner sugar. If you've hit this stage of your culinary adventure where you're contemplating macarons, you 99% already have a food scale. If not, you need one. They are like $7 to infinite dollars. Add 1 gram or a pinch of salt. Shake it up just like those late night shake weight infomercials just to get everything incorporated. Blitz it for 3, 2, 1. Stop it, pull it out, shake weight for like 2 seconds, and then repeat the process 3 to 4 times. Don't overmix this because the oils in the almonds will start to come out, which will completely ruin the macarons. If you do overmix it, you can probably just keep on going and make some sweet almond butter to spread on your toast. All this really does is make sure that the almond flour is ground really, really nice and fine so that you have beautiful, nice and smooth macaron shells instead of macaron shells that are all full of little nubbins. Set that aside for later. In a very small saucepan, add 7 grams of water and 25 grams of ultrafine or superfine granulated sugar. A lot of times this is called baker's sugar. If you don't have it, it's perfectly fine. You can use normal granulated sugar, especially because in this scenario, we're melting it down into a simple syrup for the Italian meringue. Macarons are a lot like that crazy ex or that time you had a stalker or that time when you were the stalker, unstable. So we do a lot of different things to try to make them more stable, and one of them would be to use Italian meringue instead of French meringue. The difference being is that we incorporate the simple syrup into the egg whites to make it considerably more stable. They're also shinier. The French meringue method does not actually use a simple syrup. It's just simply sugar and eggs. For the egg whites, you want to age them overnight in the fridge at least. Some recipes say 4 to 5 days. Again, it adds stability. I do highly recommend that you blitz the egg whites. So maybe just throw them inside of your smoothie mixer and just give them a good blitz so that they mix up and they are much, much easier to measure out. Adding in some cream of tartare, just a little shake, about 1 gram or less. And it also helps to whip up the egg whites in the meringue and add a little bit more stability. You can also use egg white powder or meringue powder, or you can just leave it out if you like the thrill of taking risks. This whole process happens very quickly and makes heavy use of a person's multitasking abilities. I'm putting the egg white into the mixer, leaving it off for now. Over very low heat, I'm going to start heating the water and the sugar. I'm going to bring this to a soft ball stage, which is approximately 234 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 112 degrees Celsius. Halfway through the process of heating up the sugar, we want to go ahead and turn the stand mixer on to a high speed to start whipping up the egg whites. Unfortunately, sometimes this process can go terribly wrong. If you get a little granule of crystallized sugar anywhere, like on the side of the saucepan or on the thermometer, and it happens to get back in there and hit the melted sugar, it will fully crystallize it again, making it entirely unusable. If that happens to you, just start over. Once we hit that softball stage, we want to very quickly, slowly start to drizzle in the simple syrup into our egg whites. And you can see how I'm drizzling sort of towards the edge of the bowl here and not over the wire whisks. You want to do that so it just kind of runs down the side of the bowl and the whisk picks it up and you're not at risk of flinging hot molten sugar everywhere and burning yourself. Keep mixing this on a very high speed. This does take several minutes before this really starts to get air in it and really starts to whip up into something resembling a meringue. If too much of the mixture starts to creep up the sides of the bowl, stop the mixer and just scrape down the sides to get all of the mixture down at the bottom where the mixer can pick it up again. Macarons really stand out to me as being one of the most difficult things that I have ever tried to make. Macarons just have so many points of failure. You can mess up the meringue, you can over mix the meringue, you can under mix the meringue. During the mixing process of the dry ingredients with the meringue, which is called the macaronage stage, you can overmix it, you can undermix it, you can have issues with your oven temperature running too high, running too low. The pans that you choose to use might cause issues. Even the weather can cause you issues. Don't make macarons on a rainy day or when the humidity is too high or when the temperature is too hot. Most macaron recipes are 4 times to 10 times the size of this recipe. And this recipe was designed so that it was very small so that you can work on practicing to get them right. So instead of having 100 or 1,000 crazy X's, you can go small with something that most of us can handle, like 20 crazy X's. We want to whip the meringue until it is at a stiff peak stage or just under. Here's pretty good. It's stiff, but not too stiff. To get the meringue off of the whisk, I like to beat it for a few seconds on the side of the mixing bowl. I'm going to move the meringue into a smaller mixing bowl. Unfortunately, this is really hard to mix the dry and the wet ingredients in this large bowl, so we have to dirty another dish. There's just no way around it. It's probably okay though, because my mom is visiting and she likes to clean things. Take a moment to appreciate the shiny, beautiful Italian meringue. It's time for the infamous macaronage stage. We are going to sift the powdered sugar and almond flour into our Italian meringue. This helps to remove any lumps or bumps that might cause unwanted nubbins later on. It's best to perfect test batches before adding the food coloring in because it can be a source of issues when making macarons. At first, I'm just kind of folding it in a little bit, but then you'll notice that I start to kind of bring the spatula up and make a J kind of motion. What we're trying to do is deflate some of the Italian meringue. And for some bakers, this can be pretty crazy because most of us are taught how to fold to not deflate. So it's a slightly different technique of kind of mashing the meringue against the side of the bowl to get some of the air out. We're looking for a desired texture here. A lot of people call this like the ribbon stage because it kind of falls off the spatula in like a pretty little ribbon. If you've ever made like commercial cake batter, it kind of has that same texture. And really why we want to mix it down to that texture is so that when we pipe it, we don't end up with a nubbin at the tip of it, while also simultaneously keeping enough air in the batter to make the macaron puff up and get its pretty little feet. It's easier to deal with piping bags if you put them over a cup and then just pour the batter into it. I'm using a number 8 round piping tip because we're making kind of mini macarons. If you wanted to make larger macarons, you'd probably go with a number 10 round piping tip. They do make these silicone matte macaron templates so that you can cheat when you make macarons. If you use these silicone mats, keep in mind that you probably have to bake your macaron for a little bit longer. You can also go directly onto the baking sheet, or you can go onto parchment paper. I prefer to use parchment paper, 1, because I don't really have to wash the pan, and 2, because I only have a certain amount of cookie sheets like this. I can just pull it off, let the pan cool down, and then simply reuse it. To keep the parchment paper down, I will pipe a little macaron in each corner. You want to get the parchment paper as flat as possible because any wrinkle or anything in it will cause your macarons to be misshapen. Make sure you hold the piping bag at exactly 90 degrees and you want to squeeze with the same amount of pressure every time to maximize the chances of getting similar sized macarons. If you don't have one of these, it's one of the most useful kitchen tools you can have. It's called a bench scraper. Really anything in your kitchen that's shaped like this will work for this purpose, though. You just want to push the batter towards the tip of the piping bag so that you can get as much of it out as possible. Notice that I'm using the back side of the cookie tray. If you pipe macarons near the raised edge of the pan, it heats up more and will cause lopsided macarons, excessive browning, or strange explosions. There are completely flat pans that you can buy, but most people have these types of cookie sheets in their kitchen. It's worth noting that some people double up these cookie sheets, so if you're finding that your macarons just keep getting too brown at the bottom, you can try doubling the cookie sheets. We need to vigorously smash the cookie tray on the counter several times to get the air bubbles out of the macarons. It causes the air bubbles to rise up and pop. You can kind of see them on the surface here. Air bubbles can cause your macarons to be hollow. Because this is a test, I went straight into the oven with these at 300 degrees. I have a convection oven. Otherwise, you might want to start out at 325 degrees and bake for 15 minutes. This first batch is too brown on the bottoms and on the tops, and they're wrinkled. So what I'm going to do is turn the oven down by 15 degrees, so 285 degrees, and I'm going to allow them to sit on the counter and dry for 15 minutes before baking them. The second batch came out a little bit better, but they were still too brown and they were still wrinkly on top. I turned the oven temperature down to 270, another 15 degrees, and allowed them to dry on the counter for 30 minutes instead of 15 minutes. That batch came out pretty good. I did end up decreasing the powdered sugar by about 2 grams and decreasing the egg by about 2 grams. So I ended up going with 18 grams of eggs and 23 grams of powdered sugar. The macarons should be very easy to just pull off of the parchment. If they are not, if they're sticking or when you pull them off, there's a whole bunch of residue that's left there. Part of the macaron is left there. They need to bake for longer. Now that I've figured out all of my kitchen variables, we can do another batch and make them colored. These ones I'm going to make black. Black is probably one of the hardest food colorings to use because most things it's very hard to get them black, especially when we're looking at something like a pale white macaron. I recommend using powdered food coloring for this process. Take a small amount of egg white, add the powdered food coloring in and mix it until it's thoroughly combined and then add it on top of the meringue. I didn't have enough of the black powdered food coloring, so I ended up adding some gel food coloring in as well. You want to steer clear of liquid food coloring. If you have to use it, just use 1 or 2 drops, and you might want to mitigate adding that little bit of moisture in by allowing them to dry for an extra 15 to 30 minutes until when you touch the top of the macaron, your finger should come back clean and the top should just be a little bit sticky. When I add in the food coloring, I do a little bit more of a standard folding process instead of the J macaronage process, just so that I can get the food coloring incorporated in without over mixing the batter. Once it's all mixed in, I go ahead and put it in the piping bag and pipe out the macarons again. And in my kitchen, again, a 30-minute rest with a 270-degree bake time for 15 minutes did the trick. If your macarons are a little bit bigger, you may need to bake them a little bit longer. Out they came, and once again, they came out fairly good looking. Unfortunately, my dog ate like half of the white macarons, so I ended up having to rebake those. But because it's close to Halloween, we're getting a little Halloween themed with our colors here. So we did a black batch, a white batch, an orange batch, and a green batch. The orange batch did not come out so well because I was being a little bit lazy and decided to reuse the parchment, but it was too bumpy and caused the macarons to be misshapen. Here's the second white batch because of the dog eating incident. They came out better looking than the first white batch though. It's time to work on the fillings. Because you've spent so much time making these beautiful macarons, it would be a shame to fill them with any kind of like imitation flavorings. I highly recommend to use good quality natural ingredients. So if you were thinking you wanted something strawberry flavored, maybe use fresh or frozen strawberries and make a little bit of a compote instead of adding imitation flavoring. I like to fill mine with chocolate, so both white chocolate and semi-sweet chocolate as a base, and then I will add in other things to help flavor the chocolate in different ways. You can do buttercream if you want to. I don't particularly like filling them with buttercream, but it's not a terrible option. I do like to add maybe a little bit of cream cheese into some of the mixture sometimes because I like the flavor and it cuts the sweetness a little bit. For chocolate ganache, it's 2 parts chocolate to 1 part heavy whipping cream. Heat the heavy whipping cream until it's hot enough to melt the chocolate. Pour it over the top of the chocolate and stir it up until it's a pudding-like consistency. For the best results, refrigerate the ganache until it is solidified a little bit, and then you can whip it in a stand mixer or with a hand beater until it is kind of a mousse-like consistency, and it will be very easy to pipe. I made 4 different fillings for these. One of them was 1 part chocolate ganache to 1 part cream cheese with a fresh vanilla bean. The second one was 1 part chocolate ganache with 1 part cream cheese. The third one that you see here is white chocolate ganache. I'm going to add some matcha powder in it. This is not legit matcha powder, obviously. I'm going to add in 1 drop of green liquid food coloring just to enhance the color a little bit. And then a healthy tablespoon of honey. Spoon that into a piping bag and then on to making the last filling. I obviously have some cross-contamination here because I didn't clean the mixer, but my mom refused to do it. So adding a healthy teaspoon in of espresso powder, because what goes better than chocolate and coffee? Don't forget to add the dash of salt into every single filling that you make. It's absolutely necessary. I'm just going to whip that up and again into another piping bag and it's ready to go. Filling the macarons is really simple. You just add a dollop of the filling in the center and then find 2 shells that are similar in size to sandwich the filling. Most of the fun of making macarons is doing the fillings and doing the decorating. The fillings can be super creative. They don't have to be sweet. They can be savory, which helps cut the sweetness of the macaron shells themselves. Decorating is also really fun. You can do all kinds of things. With your wet macaron shells, you can put sprinkles on them. You can melt down some chocolate and you can pipe beautiful patterns on the outside of them. You can pipe designs on the outside of them for holidays. You can even swirl the batter so that the macaron shells have a beautiful swirly kind of pattern. You can mix and match the shells so you can have a black one on top and a white one on bottom. You can also change the flavor profile of the shells. You can add vanilla beans into the shells. You can do chocolate shells. I have never successfully made a chocolate macaron shell, but even unsuccessful macaron shells taste absolutely delicious. All those failures that we talked about, the wrinkly shells, being underbaked, being brown, having nubbins, doesn't really change the amazing flavor of the macarons. It's a really hard cookie to tame, but once you tame it, it's super rewarding, and they're also highly addictive to eat. A commercially produced store-bought macaron tastes nothing like a home-baked macaron. It is well worth the effort to make these cookies. I made a poop emoji. It's a green poop emoji. Also known as baby poop emoji. Macarons are all filled. Refrigerate them for a couple of hours, better yet, overnight. There is some kind of strange thing, magical, mystical thing that happens with macarons that once they're filled and refrigerated, they are somehow magically different. Somehow the filling kind of adds a little bit of moisture into the macaron shell, and when you eat it, it's like the outside still has that little tiny bit of crunch on the shell, but then it sort of almost just disintegrates into this magical sort of texture in your mouth. I mean, absolutely an experience to eat a macaron. I love that chocolate espresso combination. Now I gotta do a matcha one. Where are you going, Mom? I don't like this little black one.
Okay.
Oh, I ended up with coffee again. All right, girl. Was this for them? There's the one I want. Nope. So sweet. Which one's sweet? Oh, all of them are. But they're delicious.